What's going on, everybody, and welcome to episode 84 of the Book Binge, where we are doing another reading wrap up and TBR video. Obviously, covering what I read in May, what I plan to read in June. May was definitely another crazy month for reading after April was itself already pretty crazy. In fact, crazy reading months is pretty much all that I have planned for the next several months, but truth be told, I'm probably going to end up taking a huge step back whether I want to or not, where the reading and whatnot is concerned. Life and work are looking to be very stressful and crazy and, just busy this summer and with the potential, in fact, pretty heavy potential of being even worse this autumn and not really letting up after that. So there's a not insignificant chance I have to cut back instead of doing 2 book binge episodes each week like I've been doing all the way through this year up to this point and will continue to do through the end of the summer. There's a not insignificant chance that that may cut back down to just 1 episode come September, which I do not like considering and I do not like saying, but if that's what ends up happening, if that's what I have to do, that's what happens and that's what I have to do. I don't know if I'll be able to help it. But with that being said, let's go ahead and get into last month's reads, what I read in May. First off, I did go ahead and finish reading Eye of the World because I believe by the time I recorded my TBR for last month, I believe I had already mentioned that I had started Eye of the World, just maybe the prologue and maybe a couple chapters into it by that point. I did finish the book, loved it. I had an amazing time with it, quite frankly. Was very surprised by how much I just enjoyed the book. But I'm going to have a review of that coming out next week, so I won't talk too much about it here. But yeah, I had a great time with it. Next up, I did read The Sea Wolf by Jack London, so the third book in this little collection that I have here. Was a decent book that was enjoyable to read for the most part, but I would say has several issues with it, which I will cover in a review of this book to come later this year. I'm not entirely sure if that one is planned or not for this summer, because I believe I had it planned to come out in like August or something like that, but I decided to switch that episode out for a review of a different book that I'll be reading this month. Or maybe next month. I don't remember for sure. Yeah, probably next month. But yeah, that's kind of how that goes. I didn't love it. I didn't hate it. I had a lot of issues with it, but there were a lot of things that I really liked as well. And I just think that the balance struck between those things wasn't exactly as good as I wanted them to be. So let's just say that about that book. In fact, I actually never went back and wrote a review for that on Goodreads. And every time I've gone to write notes for it, for a video review, I have written down a couple points and then just kind of gotten disinterested. So that's kind of funny. Either way, the next book that I read was Gregor and the Code of Claw, 5th book in the Underline Chronicles, which I did do a review of. Yes, I did do a review of this whole series last week, so you can kind of get my detailed thoughts, more or less. Well, still spoiler free, but detailed thoughts on this book as well as everything else in the series. Really enjoyed it. Definitely think it holds up compared to most of the previous books in the series, which I don't think held up as well as I hoped they would. This one definitely held up pretty much as I thought it would. For the most part, I would say. Really enjoyed it. Still think it's great for anybody who's kind of in that target audience, or if you have kids in that audience, I highly recommend for them to read it or for you to read it with them. It's a great series. It'd be a great starting point for some young kids wanting to explore on their own with reading. Next up, I did start my reread of Empire of Silence by Christopher Rocchio, which was, I believe, I don't remember if I mentioned that I started this already last time, but yeah, it was kind of an impromptu decision. I got a little over halfway through, which I'm pretty happy with, but there's some other stuff going on behind the scenes that was affecting my decision to start that, so deciding to do this kind of impromptu reread of The Sun Eater is definitely playing a lot into part of my timing issues that I'm probably going to have with the reading through the rest of the summer, through the rest of the year, generally speaking, but I'm just kind of, working with it because I chose to do it. But either way, yeah, I've been having a great time. There have been several moments in the book that just hit different after being all the way through Ashes of Man, for sure. It's been a great time, though, and I'm really enjoying it. Another thing that I did start was Malice by John Gwynne, first book in the Faithful of the Fallen. At this point that I'm recording, I'm around a third of the way through. In fact, I might be a tad bit more than a third of the way through. I'm enjoying it now, but let's just say for the first like 100 to 150 pages, I wasn't necessarily loving my time with it, mostly because John Gwynne throws so many names, so many proper nouns. There are so many proper nouns in the first 100 pages of this book that they could fit an entire small scale fantasy series just in general. Like, it's kind of absurd. The fact that you can be 125 pages into this book and you will already have 6 POVs with technically 5 different plot lines, although near the end of that, there's like 2 or 3 of them that are, yeah, there's at least like 2 of them, but kind of 3, I guess, that are kind of like starting to converge in their own way. It's really neat once some things start to converge. By the time I'm now here about 200 pages in, I'm finally to a point where I feel like I'm more or less addicted to the book and really wanting to continue and read the book, and getting less confused whenever a random name is mentioned, trying to remember which side character they were and even which, POV they were associated with, or even how they were associated with said POV. It's just a lot. It's very front heavy. This is the only book that I've read up to this point in my new reading journey since the middle of 2021 where I feel like I genuinely would have benefited and kind of wish I had taken notes on characters and stuff like that from the very beginning. Even while reading War and Peace last year, I never felt like having notes would have been like an aid to making my life easier. It probably would have been beneficial, but it wasn't anything that I felt like I needed. This book was one that was like, I kind of wish I started taking notes from the beginning because there's so many names, so many of them. But either way, that's kind of how I'm feeling about that. Finally, the last thing that I did work my way through this month was, I don't know how many specific poems, and I'm not going to list the poems that I read here, but I did finish the poem part of this collection by Edgar Allan Poe. So I'm now finished with all of those. Will at some point, later this year, maybe in August, maybe it won't come out till September. I'm not 100% certain. At some point, I will be going through and doing my top 10 poems by Edgar Allan Poe. And let me tell you what, the end of this collection, the last dozen of them, features so many bangers. It's insane. Like, there's a ton of really good ones at the very end of this collection. So, like, there's a handful of pretty good ones sprinkled throughout, but man, it is backloaded with a bunch of really good ones at the end, which I suppose makes sense because I think the poems in here are printed in order of when they would have been written, not necessarily in terms of publishing. And if that's accurate, if they were printed in this collection that I have in order of when they would have been written, that makes sense. A lot of his later poems were great. So that's what I'll say about that. In terms of my book of the month, I gotta say it's actually a pretty easy decision, not only because I only finished a few books this month, but because I was just so surprised by it. It's definitely Eye of the World. I went into this expecting a 3-star read, maybe a 4-star read at best. I got a 4-star read at worst, but something that I'm rounded up to 5 stars. There's a couple little things that I think hold it back in ways that's like, okay, well, this is maybe only like a 4.5-star read, but I decided to give it the 5 stars in Goodreads, with that kind of extra boost being the fact that I loved it so much when I thought that I would go in relatively mixed, or was kind of expecting to go in kind of mixed, just to have kind of my gauges set. If this is relatively middle of the road for the series, I'm pretty sure I'm going to love the series. That might just be wishful thinking, but if that's the case, that'll be pretty neat. Finally, let's go ahead and talk about what I plan to read this month. Obviously, first order of business is to finish both Malice and my reread of Empire of Silence. Empire of Silence is lower priority, all things considered, but based on where I am, I only need to read like 1 chapter a day, sometimes 2, only on a handful of days to finish it by the end of the month, so that won't be difficult. And then Malice, given that it is now going to be my primary read and pretty much the only book that I'm reading like a lot of every day, because throughout May, I was kind of balancing a lot of different books at once, where I was reading 1 or 2 different books. I was reading these 2 books pretty much every morning, and then I was reading 1 or 2 different books pretty much every evening. So I was like, had a lot that I was reading at once. This month, I'm pretty much only going to be reading this, and then a chapter or 2 of Empire of Silence a day every once in a while, depending on where I have time to fit it. With that being said, that's all that I really like hoping to get through. Seriously, alongside Robinson Crusoe. So basically, my namesake, whenever I get through reading this book and I do a review of it, I will be going into kind of the origins of the name for this channel being King Crusoe. So kind of my online persona. That'll be a fun story to go into. But yeah, this is the only other book besides finishing these two that I plan to read this month. Thankfully, it's short. It's not split with chapters or anything like that, which is a little bit annoying. I'm not a fan of that style a whole lot. And it is relatively archaic English. It's or a few hundred years old. But with that being said, I'm very hopeful for this. I'm not going into it with very many expectations, besides hoping to get a couple really good quotes out of it. Because I was doing some research trying to do stuff while I was building like my Discord and whatnot, looking for random quotes on certain topics from this book just because I could. And there were a couple quotes that I read based off of that was like, those are really cool quotes. So if some of those kind of hold up and I experience those and they're even better in context, I expect that this one will be a favorite, not for its story, but for, its literary effect. But we'll kind of see. I'm not going into it with many more expectations than that, but I hope to have a good time with it, given that I am King Crusoe. So that is basically the plans. If there's anything else I plan to read, it is basically auxiliary because I don't even know if I'll be able to get through all of this, but I will just say, if I have time, I would like to continue the Heroes of Olympus, but I don't think I'll have that time. I genuinely don't think so, so I'm not going to hope that I will. That's pretty much what I have planned this month, and that is the end of the update, I guess. I hope my reading isn't too greatly affected by all the changes coming to everything in my life this summer, essentially, because that's kind of what's going down. But the truth is, it absolutely will be affected by it, and I'll just have to kind of figure out how it's going to affect it. I think I'll be reading a heck of a lot less for the foreseeable future, which is why I'm kind of planning to be reading a little bit less. I don't want to plan to be reading 2 to 4 hours a day like I have been for the past couple months. I'm instead going to plan on only being able to read for about an hour or two a day at most. With that being said, that is all I have for this video. Thank you guys for checking out this update. As always, I greatly appreciate all the support on the channel. Stick around this Thursday for a video that I'm very excited for. It was a collaboration with Words in Time. Fantastic science fiction booktuber. If you have not checked his channel out up to this point, I highly recommend. One of my favorites, not just one of my favorite booktubers, but one of my favorite YouTube channels in general. He makes great stuff. That's what I'll say. If you're not familiar with sci-fi, his channel is still a great watch, so I recommend checking out his channel, as well as sticking around for that video on Thursday, him basically recommending me some space opera series based off of what I enjoyed about Sun Eater. So with that being said, that is the end of this video. Thank you guys again for watching. I'll be back on Thursday.